Press the up. Now we are going live.
They,
Don't understand. We had some technical difficulties. I'm Connor Exum of the Leon Trotsky Revolutionary Newsletter. I'm here with Matthew Ho of North Carolina and his Green Party candidacy for the Senate of that state. Good afternoon.
Hey, Connor, thanks for having me. And I certainly understand your frustrations. I mean, I feel like every day it's a race between Google and Facebook and Twitter and Zoom for my, which I dislike more that day. Yeah.
I don't like anything that isn't working.
That's right. Exactly. And it's like they take turns tormenting you. Yeah.
So I was really curious when I was reading over your platform about your ranked choice voting options, because you have two options. I mean, most people just have ranked choice voting, but you also have a proportionality system that you want to institute as well. And I was curious, why not just proportionality for all the elections? You seem to have that just for local elections, if I understand you correctly.
No, I would support that for federal elections as well. And most people don't realize up until 1971 or so, we had proportional representation in the U.S. Congress. Hawaii was the last one to have it, but a number of states throughout our history have had proportional representation for members of Congress, including New York. So
that's true.
It's not something that is, as I think many people look at it or understand it when they're approached by that idea, react to it and no, that's un-American, right? The Constitution's never allowed that, Well, no, actually, we've had it, and
it's
yeah.
No, I was just going to say the Constitution is very vague when it comes to the actual voting process. Right. It leaves that pretty much up to the state's discretion.
Correct. So I would support proportional representation, from the lowest level to the highest level. I mean, it's the fairest, most equitable. I think most people agree that if somebody gets 50.1% of the vote and their opponent gets 49.9% of the vote, that electorate, that constituency that voted for the 49.9% candidate is effectively shut out, But we also champion and believe in multi-party, multi-candidate races, that we should have a host of options for voters across a political spectrum, offering lots of different political philosophies, economic philosophies, trying to meet the needs of various constituencies. So we support, I think for us, to get back to your question, Connor, about why it says both ranked choice voting, which most people associate that with instant runoff ranked choice voting, and then proportional ranked choice voting, because we tend to see it as a 1-2 step process. That get the instant runoff ranked choice voting in place first, and then move into proportional representation. I think that's just the way it's been often addressed and advocated for. Although certainly I believe that proportional representation is the goal we have to achieve. That instant runoff ranked choice voting, while it would be it would be a great improvement over what we have now, it is not at all the be-all, end-all for our political problems, particularly for independent and minor party candidates, because I think there's a lot of evidence out there that just on its own, instant runoff ranked choice voting does not level a playing field for independent and minor party candidates.
That's exactly what I was going to get to, is that for an independent candidate, ranked choice voting to me is almost giving your votes automatically over to the two major parties without them having to even fight for it anymore.
Yeah, I've heard that argument before, and I agree with that. Again, so it's like for us, I think it's a sequencing process, and the ranked choice voting certainly is the proverbial low-hanging fruit. Once you get people to understand what it is, once you explain it, people tend to like it. People think it's a good idea. It's a good option. It allows for more choice, gets rid of the lesser of two evil voting, all on and on and on. You can vote your beliefs, not your color identity, red or blue or green for that matter, right? I mean, so yeah, it is.
Right.
But it also too, I think, on our platform, on our website, as well as other places we've spoken about this, you'll see there's a lot of issues regarding democracy reform that we're very interested in, advocate for, and that runs from abolishing electoral college, getting money out of politics, term limits, kinds of other issues that need to be addressed if we want to have, we call this democracy, and I think most of us would say this isn't a democracy. It's a shadow of one. It's a semblance of one. There's some hinting at it. Sometimes it works very well, but a lot of the times it doesn't. And what we have is a manufactured, deliberately constructed electoral system that benefits a duopoly. And you can look and see the Democrats and Republicans, they take turns controlling the White House. They take turns controlling the U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress. They're not evenly split among the governorships and the state houses, but roughly split 60-40 or so. I mean, they both have a good thing going. And this is why, most of the time in most elections, right, the biggest voting bloc are the non-voters.
That is true. But I mean, but that brings us to my next question. You were locked out almost from voting, from even being on the ballot. And it's amazing that you even got back in.
Right. Definitely you're a minor party candidate, a grassroots candidate, independent candidate. You count your victories as you have them. And for people who aren't familiar, for the North Carolina Green Party to be on the ballot in North Carolina, we had to collect 14,000 signatures, a little less than 14,000 signatures. And we collected 22,500 signatures. Now, just to give you an example, as everyone knows, each state is different. If I was an independent candidate running for U.S. Senate, I would have needed 83,000 signatures. Because for some reason, North Carolina hates independent candidates more than it does minor parties. If you go to other states, Maine, for example, where Lisa Savage ran as an independent rather than a Green in 2020 for U.S. Senate, she did that because the threshold required for independence was much lower than for parties. So we have this issue, of course, in the states, right? Each state's different.
But again, it's not always fair. Even
no,
with that.
Absolutely not. No, that's the one thing that unifies it.
Democrats and Republicans are automatically on the ballot no matter what. They have almost an infinite. Now, each candidate may have to get, a certain amount of votes, but that line is always there for them.
Yeah. And if they do have to collect votes,
it's 5,000 or 6,000.
Not even that. In a lot of states, it's hundreds. And for districts, whether it's state house districts, if it's you're talking, and they have the organization to do that. They have the party roles to do that, and also too, they're the ones who control the process. I mean, that's what we ran up against here. So we collected. We needed 14,000. We collected 22,500. We turned our signatures in. We met all our deadlines. We checked all the boxes. We presented them to the state for verification. The counties, the county board of elections, where the verification process happens, the validation process for signatures happens. They validated our signatures. We are well over the threshold required, and it went to the state board of elections for what is typically just a ceremonial verification, rubber stamping of what the counties have done, and the state board of elections, which is controlled by the political party that controls the governor's mansion. So it's a Democratic Party controlled state board of elections here in North Carolina, refused to certify us because they had questions about our petitioning process. They didn't tell us what those questions really were. They never provided any evidence. They didn't allow for any due process. And certainly never gave us any legal justification for why they were not certifying us. They literally just said, we have questions about your process and we need to investigate further. And, I'm sorry, too bad. Tomorrow is the deadline for candidates to be certified. So you, Mr. Ho, and Michael Trudeau, who is our other candidate here in North Carolina, you cannot be certified. So then we had to go to federal court, force the issue in federal court. We won in federal court. We won in federal appeals court when the Democratic Party appealed, because the Democratic Party joined our lawsuit as an intervening co-defendant. So on and on and on it went. And we lost about 3 months campaigning due to this process. We went from May 17th is when we turned our signatures into the counties. And it wasn't until about August 20th, I believe, that we were free of the courts, and that we were on the ballots and able to campaign fully. So even though they failed to keep us off the ballot, they tied us up for another month. And you can imagine, right? We have to, and we were fighting both the state of North Carolina and we were fighting the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, as well as the North Carolina Democratic Party. So it wasn't like we were just fighting the local party here. No. We were fighting Chuck Schumer's outfit from Washington, D.C. and the Elias Law Group. So, I mean, it was for you guys, again, you imagine a third party having to do with that. Well, that sucks up our resources.
Oh,
And
sure it
as
does.
much as we want to do other things, I mean, and that's all part of that's all the plan. Exactly. They didn't keep us off, but they tied us up, held us back, exhausted us, so on.
Yeah. And to put in more perhaps parlance that you're used to, it's just a war of attrition. They were wearing you down.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. It did. And you could see how it's very effective, and it causes, I mean, just for anyone who's interested, it also gets, it's mentally and emotionally straining, and then you have to keep it together, and you don't want your people fighting with each other, and it's very tense. And, and then we were able to maneuver it. So we got a lot of media attention. We had 5 national Associated Press stories about our circumstances. We had 3 national NPR stories about our circumstances. We were very good on media, but when you take a step back and look at it, you see that the media is very negative towards us. It's all about us refuting accusations that we committed fraud. And of course, we never committed any fraud. But that was the accusation, and those were the headlines. North Carolina Green Party under criminal investigation for fraud. Wasn't true, not at all, right? But that's exactly. So you had that as well. So there's a lot of stress that comes with it too. That again is part of the plan.
So that's what I was going to say. I was recently in North Carolina. I have a brother who lives there, Mint Hill. It's probably in your region because you have the whole state.
Yes, the whole state. Yeah.
And that's what I was going to get at, is that I never saw a positive sign of you on the news.
Right, because even when I was on, I'd be interviewed. It was always, "Hey, Matt, when did you stop committing fraud?" Right? That was the right. That's
the perfect loaded question.
Yes, exactly. Very much a loaded, backhanded question.
So the fraud is over now.
So yeah, exactly. What happened then, Connor, is when we were full and free. When what happened is that the State Board of Elections, so what they said is we have to investigate further, and they did this investigation. They had the counties in an unprecedented move, as far as we know. They forced the counties to go back and look at all our ballots again and everything else and all this type of stuff. And they kind of put themselves in the corner, and they knew the federal court was going to be against them. The judge made it very clear because they had no evidence. I mean, the judge's statements during the proceedings were very clear that he was very upset with the state, as well as because it's very clear what they were doing. They were deliberately obstructing us, trying to run out the clock so that we can't be on the ballot. We would miss the ballot printing deadline. That was their ultimate goal, was keep this so that if we're not on the ballot officially by August 12th, when the ballots start to be printed, that's it. You're done. Unless you get a court to stop the ballot printing. And
almost
so that
impossible.
And that was, I mean, it can happen, but I mean, they stopped the ballot printing here in August, in 2018, I believe. But that all fell in line with what the governor wanted, and they got a sympathetic judge. They had a Democratic judge. I mean, so it all worked out for them. It wasn't going to work out that way for us, or maybe not. So, and that's one of the reasons why we went to federal court too. I mean, some of it was because it was a first and 14th constitutional amendment issue for us. But the other thing too is if you go on the state courts, you can line up, and we have partisan judges down here, So, but yeah, I mean, so what happens is the State Board of Elections does this 2.5 month long investigation, basically, as well as they're in court, and there's no evidence. And so they have to eventually reverse themselves and certify us, which they did. But even after that happened, and after the federal courts looked at this and said there's nothing here, the federal appeals court, the same thing, said there's nothing here. The media didn't pick up on that then. So while we had these months of coverage, again, where we're being accused of committing fraud, once we're free and clear of that, the media just drops. And for the last several months since then, since halfway through or end of August, we have had, as you would expect as a minor party campaign, almost no media attention, which makes it very difficult to get people to know who you are.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole crux of this. There's 7.3 million registered voters in North Carolina. How do you get as many of them as possible to know that you're even an option? Because if the first time they see your name is when they're marking up the ballot sheet, they're not going to vote for you. I mean, maybe some will because it's a protest vote, or because they think my last name's funny, or something like that, right? But that's the crux of it, right? And if you don't have the media, if you're not allowed in debates, if you have to buy all your media coverage, and you're a campaign like ours, that's very difficult.
Well, that's why it takes almost $500 million to run now for a Senate seat in
Yeah,
some states.
Well, in 2020, I think a lot that had a lot to do with the presidential election. But in 2020, the North Carolina U.S. Senate race was the most expensive in history at that point, which was $300 million. They are at about $100 million right now. It's a midterm election.
Those are usually a little cheaper.
A little cheaper, but we still have and that's reporting from mid-October. So
but is that even counting the dark money that's coming in?
That's counting the dark money,
really?
Which is about of that $100 million that has been spent so far, about 40 million is from the campaigns and 60 million is that dark money. In the 2020 race, Connor,
I know it was off the charts.
It was of the $300 million. Tom Tillis, the Republican who won, he spent 25 million. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat who lost, spent 50 million. And then the remaining $225 million in that race was that dark money, that Citizens United money, that unaccountable corporate money.
From all sides.
From all sides. From all sides.
That's the big problem. People think that, oh, well, one PAC is good. No, you have to get all the money out if you really want to have a functioning democracy.
That's right. That's right. The Republicans do have an advantage in it, but the Democrats are spending a ton of money on it. And for whatever reason, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee has not committed the resources to this race as they've committed to races, say, in Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, which they have their various reasons for that, I guess.
Either they don't believe they can win it completely, or
they don't. I mean, I think, and we're starting to see the polls now shake out where it looks that like my Republican opponent Ted Budd is ahead substantially. And that's how it was in the spring. But also too, the candidate that Democrats ran, Sherry Beasley, and I'm saying this as objectively as possible, not as her opponent, but she really is not a very inspiring candidate. She's not a good public speaker. She is not. She just doesn't have that. Not that Ted Budd, the Republican, does. He's got about as much charisma as the wood post on my porch out there. I mean, but. Beasley just was not going to get people excited, and they ran a very center-right campaign. She's very much a Biden Democrat. Her campaign in the spring through the summer was about trafficking, about supporting the police, and that's the way the Democrats have campaigned throughout North Carolina, I think throughout most of the country. But, being a statewide candidate, I go to all these different candidate forums and I hear the Democrats talk, and they're all repeating the same speeches, the same talking points that they're getting from the same consulting groups. And, even in my state house district, a guy named Terrence Everett, who I would have characterized up until this race as a pretty good Democratic progressive. Like in the past, I had sent him notes saying like, thank you for standing on this issue. Very good for LGBTQIA rights, a number of things. And in this race, his flyers, which I get about one a day probably, are let's put it this way. The most recent flyer I got from him 2 days ago, I haven't checked the mail yet today or whatever, but was the whole back cover of it was Terrence Everett funds the police, right? I mean, that's these Democratic flyers and the same for the state Senate I'm getting are, if you had gotten these a number of years ago, you would have said, oh, this is a Republican mailer. It's about, public safety, family values. These are the phrases they're using, lowering costs, making America energy independent. They want to pump more. They want to frack. They want to pump more oil, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely where it's going across the whole board with the Democrats, which is the reason why we need a real party like the Greens to have some kind of buffer for that. Otherwise, we're going to have two similar parties that don't do anything.
Right. With there certainly are differences between the Republicans and Democrats on some things that are very important. Abortion, say, right? LGBTQIA rights, right? But the overlap between them is
far too much,
and it's deadly. Right? I mean, the things we're talking about, whether it's fossil fuels, climate, whether it's war, Pentagon spending, whether it's support for countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Israel, I mean, those types of things, what's been happening at our border for decades down on our southern border, right? That crime against humanity, the desire for for-profit healthcare, the support of big agriculture, the support of Wall Street. I mean, these are all life and death things that, I'm the only candidate in the race. We've had our rents over the last year in North Carolina have gone up between 25 and 60% depending on where you live, right? And I'm the only one in the race calling for rent control. And
Wow.
Democrats would never call for that. They would never do that,
Well, that would go against some of their big corporate equity funds that have been funding them. Also,
right.
What was it? I think Fortune reported about 3 or 4 months ago that the Charlotte area, I look at that because my brother lives near there.
Okay.
And they were 66% above the national average in housing prices, but their salaries were nowhere near that.
Yep.
And
I think for locally, if people say, why do we need a Green Party? Why do we need a third party or what have you? The thing I will most likely state is about in July, for the second year in a row, I believe it was, CNBC ranked North Carolina as the best state for business in the United States. And they described it as a bipartisan success story. The Democrats and Republicans put aside their differences and they made North Carolina the best state for business. Now, as you would expect, what's the corollary to that? It's Oxfam, right? Yeah, it's Oxfam ranking North Carolina again for the second or third year in a row as the worst state for workers. Right. So clearly the Democrats and Republicans line up to say we are the best state for business. We support businesses. We are the worst state for workers. Who's lining up with the workers? And of course, that's where we feel we can best represent people.
Sure. And that brings me to another question. I mean, the funny thing about North Carolina right now, I see, is that you've got a whole lot of tech coming in. But you have another big problem. I mean, you're rapidly growing in prices. You have inflation, just like everyone else does. That's going crazy, basically. When I was there, fuel went up 10 cents in one afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, here it's New York has gone up 20 in an afternoon and 30 at times. But there's no one talking to that. There's no one saying, what are we doing with these jobs? How are we making sustainable economic decisions across the whole spectrum? You're building up your high-end investors, your finance, your Microsoft, like where my brother works, and those companies. But then you're left with these small jobs and gentrification in the city center.
Absolutely. One of my Green Party colleagues who's running for Raleigh City Council, you go to any of those candidate forums, you go to any of those things, and I
got an uncle who lives there. I should ask him to go for me.
Yeah, Josh Bradley running for city council, Bradley for Workers, and but it is the that gentrification. You hear that over and over again because people are getting chased out of their neighborhood. Hey, I have both houses across the street from me here in Wake Forest. I'm to the northeast of Raleigh. Both houses across the street from me, those families had to move because corporations bought the homes and the rents went up. Right. I mean, like that is happening over and over again. I mean, here in North Carolina, in some parts of the state, 1 in 4 home sales are going to corporations. And you mentioned before, Connor, about the corporations that are coming in, the tech corporations. There's been a mania here in North Carolina and through most of the U.S. of giving tax breaks, giving incentives to corporations, which, as we know, doesn't work. There's just a big expose in the Raleigh News and Observer a few weeks ago detailing how most of those companies that enter into these agreements don't honor the agreements. They back out of them or they fail to meet the goals of the agreement. And meanwhile, we know research tells us that, I forget the newspaper in Texas that did a big study of this. Most of the corporations that take these incentive programs end up saying, you know what, the incentive program is not the reason why we came to the state. It's kind of like when they have when towns are giving when municipalities, localities, counties are giving benefits to Amazon to come in to build warehouses. Amazon needs to position those warehouses every so far. right? They're geographically dependent upon their routes and their distribution networks. They don't need any incentives. They have to build those warehouses. But politicians are so eager to please the corporations because of the kickbacks they hope to get, right, in terms of campaign donations and everything else, that they're willing to do it. And here in North Carolina, we have seen just a flurry of billions of dollars go to corporations who don't need it. I'll give you an example. We're giving it's over $1 billion is going to Toyota. Toyota, biggest car company in the world. They don't need the $1 billion to build this battery factory. Apple is coming here, not far from me, right? And $1 billion to Apple. The only company that's more profitable or bigger than Apple in the world is the King of Saudi Arabia's oil company. That's it. Other than that, it's Apple is number 2, and we're giving them more than $1 billion. We've got a couple ones that are really insane. A car company called VinFast, a Vietnamese car company, right? They haven't even built the car that they're going to, right? But they're getting about $3 billion in incentives. And the most egregious one is a company called Boom, which is going to build the next generation Concorde, supersonic.
Yes, I've read a lot about that.
Yeah, that's only on blueprints, man. And they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars, and then on and on and on. And what you see is housing prices go up because we're importing people. These companies don't hire locally. Local government costs go up because the local governments have to pay for all kinds of infrastructure improvement. And where does that go? That falls then on to homeowners and renters in terms of increased property taxes. Meanwhile, these corporations not only get infrastructure built for them, they get tax breaks, and in some instances, they actually get cash directly from the state.
Yes. Yeah, and then they bail, like Foxconn did in Wisconsin.
Right. Or they just, what happens too.
That was a $5 billion boondoggle sitting out there where they were driving around golf carts and planting trees to make it a tree farm at one point.
And then the other thing too is that as I understand, a lot of times these deals are made with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. So that when the time comes 5 years from now, if a journalist goes and says, hey, did this company ever get the 1,000 employees that they said they were going to get? Non-disclosure agreement, we can't talk about that. You see that at local and state governments. So it's all crooked.
Or even the contract is very vague, right? I mean, they put they space it out so far into the future where you actually have to meet the requirement.
Yeah.
That by the time you don't do it, the company's either gone bankrupt or the everyone's lost interest in it.
Right. Exactly. Who's keeping track of it? Yeah. Who's keeping track of it?
I was oddly surprised to see Boom moving there because, first of all, wasn't Chance Vaught in North Carolina to begin with?
Oh, I don't know.
Before Boeing bought them up and moved them somewhere else.
I don't know.
But more importantly, I was thinking the supersonic transport. That was always been a boondoggle. It was bad in '69 when we tried it. No one wanted to hear sonic booms over their house all night long.
Right. And it talk about, I can't imagine what the fuel consumption on that thing is like. So it's any type of desire to see a reduction in carbon, even though there's only a few of those planes, it's just not in the spirit of it. But they also too, it goes for who is it serving? It's serving an ultra high-end luxury market, as opposed to, I wouldn't be so upset maybe if we were building a new generation of passenger trains, I mean, like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that's odd because Charlotte has been really good with light rail.
It has, and we've had a number of things here in North Carolina promising better rail service. Actually, about 3 blocks from where I live, the old train station downtown Wake Forest. They had a ceremony, I don't know, 4 months ago or so. The Secretary of Transportation was down here because they're putting money to upgrade the rail network from Raleigh up to Richmond. Right now, it's a disaster. To go from Raleigh to DC by train, the schedule says 6 hours. It's more like 7 or 8 hours, right? So you're talking about going about 250 miles. It takes you the full day. And it's not cheap. It's $100 a ticket each way kind of thing, right? I mean, there's so much that can be done for it.
That's not too bad. I'm used to the New York State price where Amtrak from the local city of Hudson, which is 130 miles from from New York City is about $200. So
Yeah,
to go that much extra, right, another 120 miles and only be about 160, to me doesn't sound that bad. But I mean, it's relative.
it's relative. And I think also too, I think I'm just reflecting back on what the train used to cost when I used to take the train from New Jersey to college in the early 90s. And it was like,
Oh,
I don't know, $23 a ticket or
that's
something like
right.
that or whatever, right?
I mean,
And then
oh wow, you're
yeah,
used to the old MTA,
I'm used to the old right. And then
the path across from Hoboken into the city.
we used to do that. My friends and I used to go drink in Hoboken, and then we'd hop on the path and head into Manhattan for the remainder of
Right.
the night. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. So I've done that with, yeah, I know that area. I'm from upstate New York, Wyndham,
Okay, okay,
and
yeah.
that's all.
Where the
But
ski area, where the ski area
right,
is. Yeah,
exactly.
I used to ski there all the time as a kid. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you must be from upstate New York or New Jersey.
New Jersey, and then I lived in
Uh,
Orange County, New York, for a while, and back to New Jersey, and
Newburgh
then
in that area. That's rough. Well, so you must have been stationed at as a Marine. You were stationed over at what is that air
Camp
base?
Lejeune. Yep.
You were at Camp Lejeune. I thought was,
Yeah.
but you said Newburgh, so I thought you might have been in the reserve unit there.
No, no, it's down at camp. That the Marine Corps had me at Camp Lejeune, and that was I got there in '99. But I had known North Carolina for quite a while, so I graduated high school in '91, and my best friend from high school went to Chapel Hill. My girlfriend went to Duke, actually, so I would come down here,
Okay.
and then my brother came down here for college in '93. So I had been coming here for a while before the Marine Corps stationed me there. And then my parents moved here, and my sister moved, and my brother had never left when he came down here, on and on. Like a lot of people here in North Carolina,
Yeah.
a lot of folks are from the outside. That causes issues for the state. But if it's done in a way that, kind of as we alluded to earlier, you're trying to have sustainable growth that is beneficial to the community and protects the environment, it can be done. But rather, we have this mania of trying to induce corporations to come in for whatever self-motivated purposes politicians have.
Well, yeah, it looks good. It looks great on paper, and it looks great in the headline. 15,000 jobs, Toyota. You find out later that they've decided to automate half the system, and now it's 7,500. And 2 weeks later, you find out that they say, "Oh well, we automated another third of the jobs away, and we outsourced 1/10 of them to someplace in Indiana, which is nowhere near you."
Yeah, no, exactly. And a lot of the jobs that are people come in from the outside. These are not jobs that are take from the local economy or grow in the local economy. These are people they move in from other places. It is. It's a racket, and again, the costs for all that then get put onto working families, people who are the property. Just say the property taxes, the taxes that those companies are not paying are put onto the population. And it gets passed on to renters and homeowners. Of course, they're the ones who incur that.
Or worse yet, they just cut those programs out of the budget, federally and state-wise.
Yeah.
Then you don't see that happen. Then you just don't have that program anymore. Oops.
Yeah, you do. We're not as bad. North Carolina, I don't believe, is as bad as some other places in the sense of they have. I mean, the state house is sitting on a massive billions-dollar big budget surplus that it refuses to spend. I wouldn't even be opposed if they did what my libertarian counterparts want them to do and give the money back to taxpayers. Like, at least they're not just sitting on that money with no intent of ever utilizing it for anything other as some type of like slush fund that they can tap into. Yeah,
that's how they probably plan on paying for all this privatization, is from that fund.
I would imagine we do have that here, this privatization. I think, as I was starting to say, not as much as other places, I believe, but we still have it because that's the neoliberal structure of our economy and our politics. That's the way, how it's been for decades. And so, but yeah, you do see that with the whole idea of like deliberately under-resource your local and county and state governments. And when they fail because they've been under-resourced, you have the argument now that the private sector does it better, right?
That's
private sector can look at the potholes you have. Well, you cut the road.
That was Indiana. That was Indiana under Pence. And then but he did it so stupidly. He had to actually pay them, the company that owned the roads, to maintain it. They didn't have to maintain it. He paid for that. And then when they had a major crisis and other roads were shut down due to hurricanes and floods, and not floods, but and other things, they had to pay extra money, all the tolls on those roads. So they lost money beyond belief in Indiana. I used to live in Kentucky.
Okay.
And it was a big deal. You could hear it because I was in Louisville for a while.
Sure. Yeah. So right across the border, right? Yeah.
So that was terrible. And that's what's going to happen everywhere when these people start getting their hands in the cookie jar like this. They sell everyone, oh, it's going to be great. We're going to take all that money. You got to save money. You never do. I mean, Chicago lost almost $2 billion on the parking meters when they privatized that.
I come out of, the military, and I was in the Secretary of the Navy's office in Don Rumsfeld's Pentagon. So I saw that process occurring where, just as a kind of a funny anecdote, the Secretary of the Navy's office, we had speechwriters. Mm-hmm. We had, I would help speech writing, but like we had 2 Navy officers that their job was to do speech writing, and they were moved out. And of course they weren't fired from the Navy. They just got told to do like other things, and they really weren't given much to do. And this company was brought in under the guise of privatization, outsourcing. This is going to cut costs. And, you're writing speeches for the Secretary of the Navy, so you need to know something about the Department of the Navy. You need to know something about the Navy and the Marine Corps. What ended up happening was these speeches were so bad that those 2 naval officers, and I would get roped in for like Marine Corps stuff, would have to rewrite the speeches because they had no expertise. But that was all part of Don Rumsfeld's transformation. It was all this neoliberal, again, the outsourcing of government, the privatization of government that goes, back to really the Nixon administration, I guess, really where that backlash to
Nixon
Johnson
started it, and Carter.
Carter was very big on it. Yeah,
Carter.
I think Carter doesn't get as much notoriety for it. Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, but he
really when he ruined the interstate trucking, that's when the ball was just let loose, and they just let it roll down and crush everything else. I mean, everyone talks about the Malaise speech as being his big thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the look at the military. $14 trillion spent on wars in the Pentagon since 2001. Half of that went to contractors.
Yes, it did.
Right. I mean, this money that's going to Ukraine, half of that goes to contractors. I mean, so the money never even leaves the United States. These billions and billions of dollars supposedly going to Ukraine, actually, they doesn't ever get out of the U.S. Stays here. And I mean, same with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. $7 trillion went to contractors. That money just went into the bank accounts of Lockheed and Northrop and General Dynamics and others. Yeah.
Now, here's a question for you. Since you are an expert, you've been in the military, you've been in the diplomatic side. What do you think is the real response that we should have to the Ukrainian crisis?
I think it's we have to understand what are the root causes of this war. And for me, it's fossil fuel competition, commerce, if you will. And it's megalomania. It's the desire of those in DC and in Moscow and London and Kyiv to look at the map and want the map to reflect their color, right? Like a real life game of Risk. And I see those are the 2 things that are driving it. I mean, this war has been a long time coming. Anyone who wants to put this war into a box separate than the other wars the United States has been in, if anyone thinks that this war is somehow different in any substantial manner than the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, et cetera, the Congressional Research Service came out this year with a study that found the United States have participated in more than 250 military operations, occupations, interventions, et cetera, since 1991 alone. I mean, if anyone thinks that the reasons for this, certainly the people involved, are any different in this war compared to the 250 other military operations, I don't know what to tell you. That doesn't absolve Russia of what it's doing.
I understand that.
Exactly, right. But we've got this ridiculous dynamic in our country where you
Mhm.
always have to put the caveat on there, right? Whether it's about Russia, whether it's about Trump, you always got to put the asterisk that, like, I'm not supporting Trump. I'm just saying that Biden could have done this, I mean,
Oh,
right? We
sure.
got this ridiculous, but that's, so for me, it's about pressuring both sides to come to the table, ceasefire, negotiations, return to borders, that type of thing, back to the Minsk process, autonomous region in eastern Ukraine, a neutrality for Ukraine. That's what I believe is the answer, where the answer lays. I don't know how we're going to get to those points. I think that Americans are going to have a very rude awakening this winter as our heating prices are going to go through the roof. Look, the United States has increased its its gas exports
Oh,
to
yes.
Europe by 50% since last year.
Mm-hmm.
Half of our electric generation comes from gas,
Natural gas.
right? The gas companies are shipping all that gas to Europe because it's much more profitable. Prices are much higher there now, particularly after the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed, right? So the electrical generation here that relies on that gas is competing against those higher prices in Europe. And so to heat our homes this year, we're all in for a shock. We really are. And I think people in the Northeast are starting to see it. I feel like I heard something about Massachusetts. People are already getting their utility bills and saying, what? And yeah, I mean, this is this is one of the aspects of that war. But it's about fossil fuel exploitation and selling it.
So you think it's about fossil fuel? I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, all the pipelines that lead to Western Europe go through Ukraine.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's about for me. Look, I look, and certainly that's oversimplifying. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of other aspects.
Sure,
but I've got to say the primary reason or two, and again, it's also the megalomania. It's the desire for control. It's the desire for hegemony. It's right. I mean, like that kind of thing. That is a major influencer, a major a part of all of this. And I don't know if you can divorce the two. But when I go, Connor, when people say, well, whatever happened, Barack Obama in the fall of 2012 mocked Mitt Romney.
Oh, yeah, I know.
That, right. And what I go to is that, and then the United States turns on a dime. And what I go to is that in April of 2013, Dominion Energy, which is, I can't remember, the first or second largest energy company in the U.S., put about $3.5 billion into its Cove Point LNG facility in Virginia, basically to modernize it and upgrade it so it could produce exports to Europe. And that's where I kind of see this shift in American policy, where this becomes a struggle about selling energy resources, about energy markets, about exporting liquid natural gas, right, to Europe. And you've seen this play out in a way that, God, it couldn't have happened any better for American oil and gas companies in the way it's happening right now. And then particularly, too, you add on the destruction of the
Norwegian
pipeline. What's that?
Or Norwegian.
Or Norwegian, right? Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so it is. And then, but certainly I think there's other aspects of this as well. I mean, to say that there hasn't been some type of issue between Ukraine and Russia going back however long would be a really obtuse thing to say, to leave that part out. But certainly, I think from the American perspective, the American government's perspective on this war, those are the two things that motivates him.
I think that's a very astute view on it. But I also would look at Putin's need to reassert Russian dominance after such a long period of being left out in the cold. I mean, there's no doubt that Russians have always seen themselves as being the lesser European nation.
Right. Yeah.
And he does not like that, it seems.
And Putin's a guy, remember, this is a guy who likes getting his photo taken riding a horse and not wearing a shirt. I mean, this is the guy that we're talking about here, right? In a sense.
Yeah, he's got a Peter the Great kind of
he does. Yes, right? I mean, being flip about it or glib about it, but it's true. Personalities and character matter. And I think you're absolutely right. And there is a degree of understanding, too, about NATO expansion that we have to accept. When Vladimir Putin last year. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That certainly didn't help.
No, exactly. And you had legions of American military officers, diplomats, foreign policy experts for decades, since the 90s, saying, don't push too hard, don't do this. I mean, I think William Burns, who's the American director of the Central Intelligence Agency, you know, you have to see what WikiLeaks had put out a while back, you know, that shows that he very clearly said, do not expand NATO into Ukraine. Do not. This will be a red line for the Russians. And so when you see things like last year, Vladimir Putin saying to his generals, we have nowhere left to retreat to, you know, I don't know how you interpret that other than him saying, look, don't do this. Don't push me any further. And this is what I fear about the Chinese as well. We keep doing this to the Chinese for what, 25 years now. We've been sailing our aircraft carriers up to their coastline and humiliating them. They keep telling us this. They keep pushing back, and eventually it's going to be, I think, very similar to Ukraine. But I think we have people in the here in the U.S. who want this. People in the U.S. have wanted a war in Ukraine for a long time. People in the U.S. want a war in Taiwan for a long time, just as there are Russians who wanted a war in Ukraine for a long time, just as like there are Chinese who want a war in Taiwan. I mean, I say this about the Iranians all the time. I feel like American hardliners and Iranian hardliners have got like a Slack channel or something that they communicate on, you know, to encourage one another, because they just remember, right? I mean, like, you know, in that sense of that, our hardliners say something that enables the hardliners in Iran, on and on and on.
I mean, it does feed each other. I mean, no doubt that they're the same ideologies, just different perspectives of it.
Right, right. These people would
actually. Although I think in Taiwan we have a little different problem, because we have they basically become a sovereign nation, even though we don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that opens up a whole new problem for us, because to finally defend them would be admitting that they are a sovereign nation, which we haven't done since what, 1969.
Yeah,
since Nixon made that agreement.
What was that, 71 or 72 or whenever?
Well, that's when he finally got them to come to America.
Yeah, that was the but as you see, and that's why I think, you know, understanding the Chinese perspective on that, every time we send every time we advance that notion that they are closer to a sovereign nation. So whether it's one of our senior officials visits, like Speaker Pelosi did, or we sell them more advanced weaponry, you know, or our military forces, or they are training their forces, those types of things, that advances the idea of them being a sovereign nation. I think your point, Connor, there is really well taken. It's this idea of it, the establishment of it. And yeah, it's very dangerous. But the Chinese as well have, you know, certainly other things that they're concerned about, other things they're upset about. And I think too, the way that they have been, look, for however many decades, beginning in the 90s through the early part of the 2000s, we really didn't seem to care too much about about Chinese human right violations.
Oh, no.
And because American corporations and banks were making so much money there. And then as the Chinese economy gets to the point where it becomes a real competitor, not just something that we extract value from through our banks and our financial institutions, but becomes a real competitor, then all of a sudden we start to have these concerns about their human right violations. And so I think the Chinese are certainly, they see the hypocrisy in that, and they're also very fluxumed by the fact that the Americans view them as someone who should be on a lesser status, on a lesser level, that you should only build our widgets and our gadgets and the toys for our children, and you should not compete with us on our level. I think that's how. So it's a very insulting thing. I think they're taking.
Oh, there definitely is an insulting level to it. A master slave kind of dynamic that we got going on with them. But I think furthermore, they also know they're winning at this point. I mean, we produce most of our things there. Strategically speaking, I don't think we could even start a war with them and last more than 6 months before we have to ask them to build our spare parts.
I think that might be the case. I think that might be the case. I mean, for all sorts of things. I went and voted the other day. We have early voting here in North Carolina. And what they were doing was they were handing out COVID home testing kits, which is great. I wish that's not how we had to get our home testing kits, right? But hey, it's great that they're doing that. But I noticed, that home testing kit is made in China, you know, just like almost everything else that is sitting on my desk right now. or through some subsidiary. I know a lot of things are made in other places now too, but yeah, I mean, I think too for the Chinese, the resentment, or maybe resentment is not the right word, but they're just it was American financial institutions that built up their economy in many ways.
Sure.
And right, and so
when we started to invest in after
right.
Mao, that
Right.
built them up.
Yeah, and so now we are jealous or upset with or disagreeing with their success that we created and established, right? I mean, in many ways, right? So I think there's just an inability to comprehend how we can be like this,
Well, I think that too, but I think they also know that they've won. I mean, we're on the downward slide the way we're going. If we don't start building manufacturing here in the country, if we don't start actually putting Americans to work at our own things, why are our Apple computers made in, China instead of right here? I mean, they could just turn it off at any time, and they know they can do that.
Yeah. And you hear things. There's a story came out of Apple a few years ago. I don't remember who at Apple said it, but said that we can't produce them in the United States because we don't have the workworkforce here for it. Right. I mean, and that story then they retracted that and said, no, we didn't mean it that way. But that's exactly what they meant. And even you look at metrics in the sense of look at the COVID death rate in China, and then look at the inflation rate in China. I mean, so it's not like we had this, we were leading the world in COVID deaths, but our economy is just gangbusters and our working class is doing so well. I mean, like we're killing our people in the pandemic and we're crushing our working class and our middle class because of our economic policies, which have made us an incredibly unequal nation, greatest economic inequality in the history of the modern world or whatever. And meanwhile, the Chinese are pulling hundreds of millions of people out of poverty.
That's true. I mean, they've done amazing things and you can't deny it, but that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they do either.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's our problem in America. It's either all or nothing right now.
That's right, Cutter. If anyone who's listening to this is going to be like, listen to these two guys who are just mouthpieces for Beijing. And absolutely not. I'll criticize the Chinese government all day long. They are gross human rights violators. They're not that democratic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm happy to say that. But you can also acknowledge what they are doing in an objective manner, particularly when you're trying to critique our own system, our own country, and try and establish some type of solution for our needs.
That's what we need. We need to look at what they're doing right and see if we can borrow some of it. And some of that we can borrow is the reinvesting in your own companies.
That's right.
That's building right here in America. I mean, we don't have enough of that. My other brother works in manufacturing. He's an engineer for a company called Matulsa. They used to be Dana, and they built chassis for Fords. Now they're owned by a Mexican company. I mean, do you know how many companies in America that actually make bread on a national level? Zero.
Yeah.
It's owned by all of our bread companies now are owned by Bimbo Bakeries out of Mexico City.
I did not know that. I didn't know. I'm not familiar with Bimbo, of course, because of the name. And, there's a soccer team down there that's sponsored by Bimbo. I can't remember who it is. But, yeah, I mean, like, it's a great jersey, of course.
It is.
Across it, right? But, like, yeah, I did not know that about our bakery.
Sara Lee, Arnold, every one of them.
Owned by Bimbo. No kidding.
Bimbo. They own, and then there's 3 other companies, but they're all foreign that own all their stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting how that has worked, right? Where, as you know, our financialization policies, again, going back to Nixon, Carter, right? This idea that we are going to, our goal is going to be to get money through rents, through, people kicking up money to the top, overhead costs or whatnot, if you will, right? Bank fees, that kind of thing. And, the idea of we are going to have a strong dollar policy, whether we say it or not, and whether it actually works out that way or not. It doesn't always work out that way. But the idea is that we're going to buy.
We like the weak dollar.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're going to buy all these overseas factories and, import everything. And that'll be cheaper for workers so we can suppress their wages and we can give them credit and on and on. The whole thing is right. But this what you're seeing now, though, where this financialization policies are coming back in the sense that the American corporations and finance institutions are starting to lose their market share of what they
Right.
own.
That's
And
right.
like what you just described there with the bakeries. I mean, I bet most people have no clue about that, about the bakeries. I certainly didn't. So yeah.
There's only 6 manufacturers of food in the whole world.
Yeah.
6 companies. 10 car companies, basically, that matter. And now the new Vietnamese companies that are coming out. But
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the problem. It's this consolidation of wealth. And when you have that, any nation that where it's not important to them, they just let wither.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's what,
Right.
so we have to start getting local programs that are really built to manufacture, do things that are sustainable in our own states. And I know the Green Party is pretty big on local cooperative and worker rights.
Right. Right. And we're very big on employee ownership, which would be a remedy to this, because when your ownership or shareholders, when it's to maximize profit, to squeeze again every dollar. And so we see this, right? We can look at, there's plenty of charts and graphs out there that show this as these neoliberal financialization policies come into place in the 70s and really solidified in the 80s. You start to see the money no longer going into workers, money no longer going into productivity, right? No. Corporations are no longer reinvesting in themselves. They're doing the bare minimum they have to. But meanwhile, the money gets kicked up to shareholders. You have stock buybacks, executive compensation, and then you also have mergers and acquisitions. Right, you're going to buy out your competitors, which leads to consolidation. You're talking about, so for us, the idea that your remedy to that is employee ownership. The idea that employees are not going to maneuver the corporation or the company or the business in a way that is only seeking short-term profits, because their value, their concern for their ownership is themselves and their coworkers. Right, not the profits of, and you see this even more with so many of the principal shareholders of like 95% of the S&P 500. The principal shareholders are 5 or 6 financial institutions: State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock.
And they're all interlinked. Their boards are all have members, cross members.
Right.
So
exactly.
I mean, how do you not have a perverse system that doesn't fall in on itself with that kind of corruption at the top?
Right. If you are that type of interconnection, I'm trying to think of the right word to describe it, but that's what unites. It's not just the fact that the Pentagon is the largest purchaser of gasoline from ExxonMobil that connects them. It is the fact that those weapons companies, their boards of directors, are more or less the same people as the board of directors, in the media industry, in the agriculture industry, that's why they're all linked together, as you described. They come out of the same schools, they live in the same neighborhoods, they have the same interests. And then again, their principal shareholders are the same banks. So you have that underlying requirement to meet the need of your boss, basically. And that's what you see. And again, if you reverse that and have employee ownership build from the ground, local, you have an opportunity to not fall into those traps.
And you also have the other good thing about that is you have people that are actually concerned with the local environment that they live in. They're not going to say, oh, well, I really don't live there. I'm not so concerned about PCBs. Like, Schenectady with GE did for a century. Or DuPont has done with Delaware.
Comoros is one of those companies down here. Certainly too. You can see with the military bases down here in North Carolina. I mean, those colonels and generals, they're only going to be at that base for 2 or 3 years. Then they move on.
And sometimes they move on directly to the people that they do the most business with. Like,
absolutely. But
Randall Duke Cunningham.
God. He's not still. He hasn't been in jail for a while. I think he's out.
He got out. He claimed that it was going to be a death sentence, a 20-year.
Because he got like a real serious sentence.
Yeah, he had cancer.
Was that what happened to him? But I was going to say, actually here, with the environment here, with the toxic poisoning of our ground and our water and our air as well, because one of the things they do down here, we have a lot of hog farms.
Oh,
I
I
think
know.
I think we have the second most, I believe, after Iowa.
I thought it
And
was
the
the
air,
first now.
is it the first now?
I thought it
It
was.
might
Yeah,
be.
it's either you always vie with Iowa as which one's going
Yeah.
to be the hog
Yeah.
capital of America.
And we're not as bad off as Iowa is in terms of groundwater contamination like they are. They have more or less destroyed their aquifer
I know.
from animal agriculture. Here in North Carolina, one of the things that the state legislature allowed a number of years ago is the aerosolizing of hog waste.
Yeah, I know.
So literally just firing off hog waste through fire hoses with a connector on it or a nozzle on it that aerosolizes it. So you're just literally putting your hog waste into the air. I mean, like that is the state of our animal agriculture. But what we have in this state, because whether it's because of energy companies, chemical companies, again, the military bases,
Right.
I'm not kidding, Connor. I can't keep up with which communities in North Carolina can't drink their water, because it is like every couple of weeks, another town, another municipality has their water shut off because of this type of contamination. And then, of course, some of the things that we're just becoming aware of now, the PFAS contamination, right? The forever chemicals.
Teflon. That's the magic of Teflon that DuPont has sold us on. And they've known since like the early 50s that they were killing their employees in the plants with it, but they didn't say a word about it. And they just let them keep on going.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I know, and that's a huge problem. And you'd think the Democrats would want to talk about it.
No, they're in the same pockets of these corporations,
these
companies. Yeah.
And they're gonna be crying about the Green Party taking 3 or 4% away from them this year, and saying how un-American it is to have choices,
right,
at the ballot box. But they have to look at themselves. I mean, Mississippi was a perfect example of something they could have fixed relatively quickly and relatively easily. And what do? They hide from it to talk about January 6th.
Right. No, exactly. There's so much, and then it's just the level of suffering that people are enduring because of the healthcare situation, the housing situation, because of just costs, living paycheck to paycheck. And I'm just talking the financial aspects of that, the economic aspects of that, not talking about the physical aspects about that. People, living, right? People having to live with family, people having to, or the healthcare, people not getting the healthcare they need.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the suffering is very real. And unfortunately, if we don't build an alternative, more and more people will just turn away from the electoral system, which is ultimately what I think the Democrats or Republicans want. Because I think at the end of the day, if the Democrats or Republicans had their way, you'd only be allowed to vote if you're an MSNBC viewer or a Fox News viewer, right? I mean, like that's what they want. They want to shrink the voter pool down to something that they have complete control.
Well, I think that's been one of their things. I think the Democrats have had since the 90s when you started to see them turn against immigration. And they were before Trump wanted a barrier, Dianne Feinstein wanted a barrier in like 92. She had that speech she gave, and Clinton gave 2 or 3 speeches at the end of his term about, the southern border problem.
Yeah.
And they don't want the browning of the Democratic Party because it doesn't fit the white elite aspects that they've been grooming for the last 50 years now.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that because a number of years ago, I was on the board of directors for a political action committee. It was a 501c4. It was meant to, the idea is for arms control and nuclear weapons reduction and things like that, right? Called the Council for a Livable World. And very Democratic Party aligned. And we have people on our board who were working with the effort 10 years ago to turn Texas blue. Their attitude was that, look, the demographics are shifting. And all these Latinos are going to vote for the Democratic Party. And you say, well, how come they're going to vote for the Democratic Party? And they would say, because they have to. They're not going to vote for Republicans. They're brown. They have to vote for us. That was literally the whole scope and scale of their outreach was you have to vote for us. But remember, like Joe Biden said a couple of years ago,
if you're not black, you're not black if you don't vote for me.
That's exactly right. It was like that type of arrogance and that type of entitlement. And what have we seen? We've seen Republicans do actual real outreach to the Latino community and the benefits from that, where, Trump got a ton of votes from that community. You know what I mean? Like
That was
so.
this. No, you can continue. I was just
Oh
thinking.
no, I mean, so it is.
That was
it
like
is.
the strangest. The Trump reversion. I mean, the guy tells you that they're all rapists. You're all rapists and murderers, and still somehow he gets you to turn for him. I never understood that one.
Well, people are desperate. People are desperate. They've been left out of the system. They're abused by it.
Mhm.
They're disaffected. They see no. They view the corruption of government. I just was reminded of this morning. You know, there's been actually another thing in a great article by Blake Fleetwood in Sheer Post yesterday.
Okay.
But terrific article. But he talked about this, and as well as there's a New York Times piece about this back in October, that, you know, voters, 70% of voters are talking about political corruption as their chief concern. You know, and not the Mar-a-Lago stuff, not January 6th, not like kind of what happened with us being trying to be kept off the ballot, but the capture of government by businesses, right? The buying and selling of politicians by corporations and banks and the wealthy. That's what vote. I mean, and so people are turned off by it. And so you see a community like here in North Carolina, a Latino community, which is by and large, is growing larger than any other community in North Carolina by a clear amount, right? And they are underrepresented in voting by a factor of 4.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, like, and so you see that, and then you look at the metrics for the Latino community in terms of home ownership, in terms of business ownership, in terms of the wealth gap, you know, educational access, you know, everything else. And yeah, there is that correlation. And you have somebody like the Democrats aren't going to do anything for them. They won't. And so you have someone like Trump who says some things that at least makes him sound like an outsider. And maybe he is going to break it, and he's going to drain the swamp, and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so it is.
I think at least they thought that maybe, just maybe, they might have a chance with this pro business, that they would benefit from that.
I guess, yeah, this idea of a trickle down, right? It still exists. It's that narrative that what's good for business is good for America. Yeah.
What was it? Calvin Coolidge, the business of America is business.
Yeah. I mean, and that's something that has been ingrained in us. You know, I mean, we have just that is one of the founding and consistent mythologies of America is rooted in capitalism, about business, and then it gets into the individualism and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything else. But this idea that trickle down particularly is going to have this magical effect, where we know every study has shown it's not. You can just look and see your neighbors and how they're living and know that it's not. You know, 60% of us are living paycheck to paycheck, obviously not working, you know, but people believe in it, you know, and it's not the facts. It's not the rational, the logical, it's the emotional that counts. So
that is true. And you can see that, you know, and the Democrats are using their large group of people that I don't know if they've hired all of them, or that they're sympathetic on Twitter, and they're selling the narrative that, you know, inflation is temporary, but, you know, freedom is forever. And, you know, that's going to turn off a lot of people when people are going homeless because they can't pay their rent in a couple of months, and they can't pay their fuel bills. I mean, and that's, people are going to look at that and say that's going to be equated to the let them eat cake kind of attitude.
That's exactly right. With the as we were kind of talking about before, as heating costs come up, right, as fuel costs continue. I mean, and then you're not gonna be able to afford to buy your kids the Christmas presents you want to buy them. I mean, like, stuff like that has a real effect on people.
I was online looking at something really mundane. I think it was like $54, but the website was going to allow me to buy it in installments of like $8 at a time. I mean, that just shows where we are economically.
Right. That's a real indicator. It is. And then the Fed just said they're going to raise rates. Yesterday they said that, or today or this morning, I can't remember which. And you have that where, okay, you have this the policy is to create unemployment. And so whatever relief this country has gotten from unemployment, and I think, like, you agree, our unemployment numbers are bogus, but, like, you know, and it doesn't accurately reflect underemployment and other things. But certainly the policy is going to be to reverse and stamp out any type of worker gains that we've seen over the last couple of years.
Well, that's
and people
definitely
are going to
one
feel
thing.
that. Yeah.
Yes, I think we already are starting to feel it. I
Yeah.
mean, and I think that that's the reason why they push so hard against you in early May, because they don't have any plans for rampant inflation. They don't have any plans other than to say, look, it's only temporary. And the last
Yeah.
time we saw this kind of stagflation was what, in the 70s?
Right. Yeah.
And it lasted for almost a decade until Volcker decided to do his shock therapy on us, and when interest rates went through the roof, and everything crashed, and Carter looked like a fool
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
tell
No,
everyone that things were getting better.
exactly. Exactly. As people were not able to afford the things that they could
Mhm.
afford just a couple, right? I mean, like, and that's
Yeah.
what you see. I think you get also too, you get in again, it's the emotional, or the how many years now running have we had these surveys and polls that come
Mhm.
out that say people don't believe their children will do as well as they did. The
Right.
first time in American history that happened. I forget when it happened, but it was recently,
I think it was
in the last
2019 or 20.
yeah, yeah, exactly. In the last several years,
Yeah.
that for the first time ever, Americans are saying that their kids are going to be less prosperous than they are. And that has a real effect on our psyche, on who we
Mhm.
are as a people, and then I think as the climate worsens
Mhm.
and as we have, uh, increased reactionary forces take power throughout the country, and we have a rollback of
Mhm.
fundamental civil liberties, and we have to fight to keep the things that we do have. I think that's going to have an effect that just might be so that might aggregate in a way that it is existential for us. I don't think that's hyperbole to say that. I hope that's
I
not where it goes. We have to fight against that, but I think that's where these things can lead to.
I think we're already there at the
Yeah,
at the cusp of that existential dilemma. I mean, I
yeah,
think the one thing January 6th showed is that we're ready to pop.
I know.
And the question is
Yeah.
who is going to be, and it looks like it's going to be the right that's going to pop first and
Well,
with the most violence.
and they're organized, and I actually have to get off in a couple minutes,
Yeah.
but and I've really enjoyed this, Connor. Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks.
And but so I was we go out for the campaign, and we
Mm.
go to different events. We go to a lot of Pride events and a lot of
Mhm.
supported Pride events, and one of the events I went to, the Proud Boys were there,
Oh.
and they what scared me and unnerved me about that was how disciplined they were. They were all in uniform. They were in their black and gold. They all were wearing the
Mhm.
same kind of face coverings, and they weren't acting like fools. They weren't acting like clowns.
Mhm.
They weren't taunting or saying anything, or they just stood there with their
Mhm.
banners
Mhm.
and just were disciplined. And if they have the right leadership, it shows because they're able to do that. And if that leadership had said
Mhm.
attack,
Attack. It
they
would have
would have.
attacked.
They would have attacked. And that's what scares me. You said about the
Mhm.
right pop is the right is preparing for it, and the
Mhm.
right is disciplined. It's organized. It's putting plans together. It has, regardless of what you think of these people, Gavin McGinnis or Steve Bannon or whoever,
Well,
they
those are the
have
clowns.
what's
I'm
that?
more. I said those are the clowns that make the popular those are the loudspeaker guys. I'm more worried about the guys with the actual military experience that are in leadership that know how to organize. Kind of like in the beer hall push. You got to be
Yeah.
worried about Lindorf. You don't worry about Hitler as much at that point. You worry about Lindorf. He's the guy setting up the actual apparatus behind it.
Right, you do, and I saw that with the Proud Boys, that type of, and a lot of them were military, or
Hmm.
law enforcement. You can just kind of tell by their demeanor and how they,
Hmm.
they carry themselves and how they stand. And you have that understanding of control. You're going to have the understanding of hierarchy and
Hmm.
organization, the need to plan, the need to prepare, the need to rehearse.
Hmm.
That's one of the things these people do is they rehearse,
Oh yeah,
and they're
training
prepared.
all
Yeah,
the
and they
time.
train, and there's a reason for that. And I think, yeah, I'm very, I think, on the same page as you are, very concerned about that. And what that does is that their numbers may be small. They've certainly grown, and they
Hmm.
are growing, and that attracts people because these people. Look, I saw a photo a few weeks ago of the Young Lords
Hmm.
marching in New York City in 1971 or
Hmm.
whenever it was, and how disciplined they were. right? And in comparing that to the American left now, right? And American left now will say, "Oh, but look, the Young Lords took over hospitals." I mean,
That's right.
like you want to talk about how radical they were, I mean, so the American left needs to shed its distaste or its attitude it has against organization, right, and against hierarchy. Sure, I'm against illegitimate hierarchy. I have my streak of anarchist in me too, but this idea that we have to be organized to be effective is something that I keep coming back to.
Well, we're going to have to be organized, otherwise they're going to roll over us.
Right.
Quite literally.
Quite literally.
Because they are trained. They did, most of them are, Marines, Army, Navy vets. They understand it. They live it. They trained each other, and now they keep on doing it.
And some of it is just the reality of who they are. These are people who want authoritarian leaders, so they're more than happy to fall in line and get in file and walk somewhere in a line together. On the left, no, we're definitely not. We're not down with the authoritarianism. I mean, so like, we all want to have horizontal leadership and democracy and everything else. And, but when you get to the, what we're talking about here, yeah, it's very dangerous, but I need to log off. But I appreciate this very much, man.
Anything you need to plug?
Well, yeah.
Your website?
Yeah, absolutely. Last week of the campaign, we certainly can still use the help. We need to look, the money we get in now, we can still put towards advertising to make sure people know that we are an option on the ballot. That, so again, like the first time they see my name or Michael Trudeau's name or Josh Bradley's name or whoever is not when they're marking up their ballot sheet, to let people know that the Green Party is an option, as well as let people know who and what the Green Party is, because most people have no idea in North Carolina what the Green Party is. So there's a lot for us. That's a big part of this, is just building, growing out, creating a network, creating infrastructure, et cetera. So if people can help out, the website is mattforsenate.org. Okay. Matt, the number 4 followed by Senate. So mattforsenate.org.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. It was great talking to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime, Connor.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye. You have a good one, man. We'll see you.
Bye.